The contempt trap. Why do we need to talk about this? To make you the smartest person in the room, I want to teach you a basic lesson about how courts can hold you in contempt of court even when the courts themselves have screwed up. And that, I think, is what's really going on here with a lot of these anti-Trump cases. The judges are trying to trap the Trump administration with their games. I don't know if they're going to get away with it, but I want you to be able to identify to make you the smartest person in the room. Stay tuned. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and I'm proud to say the top voice of the Second Amendment in America. Thank you, 2025 Gundies Awards, and for all your support out there. All right, so I don't want to belabor this point, but I think this is very important for you to understand it because a lot of you read the news, you watch Fox News, you probably saw me on Fox News, over the weekend a couple times. I want you to understand something known as the contempt trap. And I want you to understand this because this is very important for just understanding it generally, including the Second Amendment context. Because here's how it works. There's a basic rule of law that says that you have to follow and comply with the judge's ruling, the judge's order, even if it turns out that that ruling or that order is improper. It was wrongly decided. Now, the reason why this is a big deal in the context of these anti-Trump lawsuits involving fights over whether or not Trende Aragua can be deported under the Alien Enemies Act and some of these other cases is as follows. I think President Trump is likely going to win all these cases on the merits at the Supreme Court and set very favorable precedent for Donald Trump. And I should say for the President of the United States and the executive branch. Because under Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution, the executive has the power to enforce the law, protect our borders, and keep us safe from, in particular, foreign invaders. That's like the primary purpose of the federal government, is to protect us against foreign invaders. Everyone understands that's like the most fundamental jobs and not handing out food stamps. But I digress. The point is that Donald Trump is kicking people out of the country. He is invoking various federal laws, including the Alien Enemies Act, that says that if someone is engaged in war against the United States or they've invaded us, the president has the authority under federal statute, as well as under Article 2 of the Constitution, to declare an invasion or a war and kick people out of the country who are foreigners. Again, this doesn't apply to American citizens, so it's not like they can kick you and me out, but they can certainly kick foreigners out, whether they're here on a visa or they're here illegal aliens. It doesn't matter. They have the authority to kick people like this out of the country. And there are lawsuits trying to prevent Donald Trump from doing this. So the reason why I want you to understand this contempt trap notion is this. At the end of the day, I think President Trump is ultimately going to prevail on these cases. So what's really going on here, of course, is that you have this attempt to delay the President Trump agenda. So they use lawfare against President Trump to deny him the ability to get elected and then reelected. And now that he's elected, they're using lawfare again to try to stop the Trump agenda. And one of the ways you do this is you try to drag it out over time because President Trump only has 4 years. One of his biggest commodities is time. And every single day they bottle up his agenda is a win for the anti-Trumpers. So the reason why this is important is you need to understand what's going on here in a lot of these district courts, in my opinion. And that is this. There are orders being entered by these judges. And these orders tell the president to things like turn around the plane, don't send people out of the country, don't move people around the country, make sure you answer my questions. I'm directing you to answer these 1,000 questions in writing, signed by somebody with authority, and so on and so on. Now, odds are all of these orders are going to turn out to be improvidently granted. They're going to turn out to be improperly granted with no legal basis. But the problem is, remember that rule of law I mentioned earlier that says that even if a judge enters an order that is wrong, he gets it wrong on the law, he screws it up entirely on the law, even if that happens, his order that's wrongly decided and wrongly entered still must be complied with until it's gotten rid of, until it's appealed and removed. Now, the reason why this is important is that Donald Trump and Pam Bondi, and I'm not making excuses here, I just want you to understand the context in which the Trump administration, Pam Bondi as the Attorney General, are fighting these judges and these courts. You got to understand the big picture context as to why it takes so much time to deal with this nonsense, and sometimes that may delay other agenda items like the Second Amendment, which is exactly the purpose of this lawfare that's going on today. They're trying to delay the Trump agenda because the more they focus him on these issues and bottle up in the courts on immigration issues, for example, it slows down his ability to make progress on other fronts, including, yes, the right to keep and bear arms. Right? Because, the old saying on a submarine, you run to where the fire is, right? Everyone runs to where the fire is. That's the priority. And right now, the fire is on these crazy federal judge decisions, basically trying to usurp the power of the federal government, of the executive branch, to make decisions to protect us from enemy invaders. So the key to understand all of this is that these judges know this, and there's two things they're doing to try to screw up Donald Trump. On the one hand, they're entering these orders that they know likely are not going to withstand the test of time, the test of the appeals, but they don't care, because by entering these orders and forcing the Trump lawyers and the Trump administration to spend time responding to the orders delays the Trump agenda, number one. Beyond that, to the extent that they can show or establish that someone in the Trump administration failed to comply with that order, they can hold that individual or the administration in contempt of court, even if it turns out President Trump wins on the appeal. So that's the second way they're trying to mess up the Trump agenda. Again, delay, force them to devote energy and resources to these nonsense cases. Then they're going to try to hold them in contempt of court, because they'll be like, hey, even if I lost the case, if the judge says, even if my work is overturned on appeal, it doesn't matter. I'm still going to hold you in contempt of court because I have the authority and the right to protect my court orders and to protect my court's jurisdiction, even if it turns out I was wrongly, even though the order was wrong. You see this game is getting played. So that's why when you look at this case involving Judge James Boasberg there in D.C. involving Trende Aragua and the deportation of those foreign illegal alien gangsters, these cartel members supposedly, that's what's really going on here. And that's why he's asking the Trump administration to respond to all these questions, because he's trying to get them to either get caught in something that's a falsehood, at which point he can then contend that's a lie, and they can be held in contempt for lying to the court, and or he's trying to get them to be held in contempt of the court by failing to comply with his order, which is a separate problem than actually winning the case. That is really what's going on here, and I want you to understand all of this, because this impacts our right to keep and bear arms. It impacts our right to religious liberty. It impacts our right to free speech, because again, every day that President Trump is dealing with these lawsuits, is taking these appeals, is responding to these requests, is trying to avoid being held in contempt, is distracting. It's mentally distracting from advancing the agenda. So these distractions, these games these judges are playing, in my opinion, this is not a bug. This is a feature. They're doing it on purpose to delay the Trump agenda. They could not stop him from being elected. Now they're trying to stop the agenda from being effectuated and implemented on purpose. And it does impact our right to keep and bear arms, because I do think the reality on the ground, I'm not making excuses, I'm just telling you the reality on the ground. Each of us, we only have 24 hours in a day, and usually you have to sleep 6 to 8 of them, and then you have to have breakfast and so on. So, you only have so many hours to get the job done. And if people like Attorney General Pam Bondi and a lot of other lawyers at the Department of Justice are laser focused on dealing with these fires from this craziness with these judges, they are being distracted and taken away from other agenda items, such as fixing major issues associated with infringements of our right to keep and bear arms. Again, this is not an excuse, it's just an observation about the way the real world works. And beyond that, I just want to say one additional game these judges are playing, and this is another way to make you the smartest person in the room. We've talked about the differences in the past between a temporary restraining order on the one hand, and a preliminary injunction on the other. And the key difference is, it's a general matter, when I bring a lawsuit to try to enjoin you, which means to enter a court order that stops you from doing something, like I'm enjoining you from going home, I'm enjoining you from enforcing the law, I'm enjoining you from kicking the person out of the country, whatever it is. There's two separate versions of injunctions you need to be aware of. The first is a temporary restraining order. The temporary restraining order runs from basically the time you bring the lawsuit and you seek the motion to the time you have a hearing on a preliminary injunction. And then after there's a hearing on the preliminary injunction, after briefing and argument, a decision is made on the preliminary injunction. So a TRO extends from really the start of a case until you have a preliminary injunction hearing, which is usually a few weeks after you start the case. And then after you have a preliminary injunction hearing, if there's an entry of a preliminary injunction, that preliminary injunction stands until either the case is over or it's appealed and reversed. And then at the end of the case, you might have what's known as a permanent injunction, which is a permanent enforcement of some sort, but we don't really get into those for the purposes of this conversation today. Now, the reason why I want you to really understand this is not an insignificant distinction between a TRO, temporary restraining order, and a preliminary injunction. And why is that important for you to be the smartest person in the room to understand this distinction? It's this. Listen carefully. Donald Trump's Department of Justice and you and I all have a legal right to appeal from the entry of a preliminary injunction. You have a right to appeal immediately from the entry of a preliminary injunction against you. You do not have a right to appeal from the entry of a temporary restraining order against you. This is a key difference because what's going on right now in these district courts in many instances is they're trying to enter as many orders and do as many games and force Donald Trump to do all this work in the context of fighting over the temporary restraining order. Why? Because when the judges enter these orders and make these demands and say, give us this and give us that, President Trump, Pam Bondi, and so on, they do it in the context of a TRO, temporary restraining order, because it prevents Donald Trump and his lawyers at the Department of Justice, Kash Patel, and the others, Pam Bondi, it prevents them from immediately appealing these orders because those decisions are being made by judges in the context of a non-appealable TRO or temporary restraining order. They're trying to delay the entry and the decision on the preliminary injunction because once that PI or that preliminary injunction is entered, Donald Trump and his Department of Justice can seek an immediate appeal, which is why there is a sort of foot dragging going on, in my opinion, with these district court judges trying to drag out the TRO, temporary restraining order litigation process, understanding that the longer they drag that out, the longer they prevent President Trump from having the legal right to seek an appeal of the decision against President Trump because they enter these TROs against Donald Trump and his administration. Then they make them turn over all this information in the context of the TRO, and Donald Trump has to waste his time doing all this nonsense. And several weeks later, they then may eventually enter the preliminary injunction order. Then it's appealable, but you've already lost several weeks that you could not appeal in the context of that TRO fight. And that's the other critical thing to understand what's going on in the real world here. And again, I want you to understand all these things because as I've explained to you before, the smarter you get on the Constitution, on courts, on the legal dynamic, on litigation, and the way all of this stuff in American law works, the better an advocate you will be for our right to keep and bear arms. Because as I've explained to you before, all of American law is like a spider web. It's a tapestry. It all blends together. And if you start tugging on one aspect of the spider web, the entire web moves. If you start messing with American law generally, it affects all of American law. And that is a reason why the U.S. Supreme Court is often very, very careful with their decisions because they understand that a decision in one area of the law will set precedent and will have a ripple effect potentially on all other areas, on all sorts of other areas of law, which is why they really take their time, sometimes over a year, to write these opinions because they know the ripple effect of their decision is huge and they're very sensitive to that, and that's why they have to anticipate what will the words we put in this opinion mean for the rest of American law. And that's why I want you to touch fingers and understand some of these other issues touching on American law and not just the Second Amendment, because even if it doesn't appear to touch on the Second Amendment, the reality is it really does. And that's why I try to connect this all up for you to make you the smartest person in the room and the best possible advocate for our right to keep and bear arms and our Constitution and our country. So there you have it, folks. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure you follow me on X at 4Boxes Diner. Don't forget to subscribe both to YouTube and to Rumble, and I really appreciate your time here. And I'll see you soon here at the 4Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.